Hello folks, this is Jason from Mysterious Wilderness. Today, we're looking into one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in American history, the case of D.B. Cooper, the man who hijacked a commercial airliner, extorted $200,000 in ransom, and then vanished into the night, parachuting out of the plane, never to be seen again. On November 24th, 1971, Cooper executed what has become one of the greatest disappearances of all time, leaving behind a trail of intrigue, suspicion, and endless speculation. In this video, we'll explore the details of that fateful night, from the hijacking itself to the massive manhunt that followed. We'll examine the clues, the suspects, and the theories that have fascinated investigators and conspiracy theorists for decades. Was D.B. Cooper a criminal mastermind who planned his escape perfectly? Or did he meet a darker fate in the dense forest of the Pacific Northwest? Join us as we delve into this mystery and try to piece together the puzzle of a man who vanished without a trace. On November 24th, 1971, as the busy Thanksgiving travel rush was in full swing, a man arrived at the Portland International Airport. His appearance was unremarkable, just another traveler blending into the sea of passengers. He wore a black raincoat, a dark suit, and carried a briefcase. At first glance, he looked like any typical businessman preparing for a short trip. But there was nothing typical about this man, nor about what he was planning to do. With a calm demeanor, he purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper and paid $20 in cash. No identification required, no security checks. This was, after all, the 70s, a time when air travel was straightforward, and the idea of airport security was basically non-existent. So, boarding pass in hand, he made his way to the gate and onto Northwest Orient Flight 305, a short 30-minute hop north to Seattle. He took his assigned seat, 18C, in the last row of the plane. Little did anyone know, he was about to make history. Settling into his seat, Cooper ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, and waited. His calmness was almost unsettling. The other 36 passengers and 6 crew members had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. But for Cooper, everything was going exactly as planned. At 2:50 p.m., the Boeing 727 lifted off the runway, climbing steadily into the cloudy sky. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper turned to the flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, and handed her a small piece of paper, a note that would set the stage for one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Initially, Schaffner thought the note was just another flirtatious advance, a common occurrence for flight attendants in that era. I mean, have you seen some of the uniforms they wore at the time? As a red-blooded American male, I can assure you that while inappropriate, that kind of behavior is unsurprising to say the least. And don't get me started on how the airlines treated those poor girls. But yeah, the past really was the worst. Trust me. I've studied a lot of it, and there are some things we just shouldn't bring back. That's all I'm saying. Okay, rant over. Miss Schaffner, obviously of the same opinion as I, simply slipped the scrap of paper into her pocket without reading it. However, Cooper leaned closer and whispered, "Miss, you'd better take a look at that note. I have a bomb." She froze. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. The message contained 3 simple but terrifying statements. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit next to me. This is a hijacking." Cooper opened the briefcase just enough for Schaffner to see what appeared to be a bomb. 8 red cylinders wired together with a large battery. Despite the horrifying revelation, Cooper's demeanor remained composed, almost courteous. He wasn't erratic or angry, he was calm and polite, as if negotiating a business deal rather than threatening to blow up an airliner and all those on board. He then outlined his demands: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle to refuel the aircraft on the tarmac. Schaffner relayed the hijacker's demands to Captain William Scott, who, along with the rest of the crew, remained professional despite the growing tension. Following protocol, Scott contacted Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, informing them of the hijacking and relaying Cooper's demands. Cooper's calm, almost clinical demeanor helped keep the situation from escalating, and the crew worked to ensure the safety of everyone on board. For the next 2 hours, Flight 305 circled above Puget Sound, as the FBI and airline officials scrambled to meet Cooper's demands. Agents rushed to assemble $200,000 in $20 bills, each serial number carefully recorded. Meanwhile, the passengers remained oblivious to the drama unfolding around them, reassured by the crew that the plane was simply being delayed due to a minor mechanical issue. On the ground, authorities were on high alert. Every bill was photographed and marked to make them traceable. The parachutes were borrowed from a local skydiving school, and a fuel truck was stationed as requested. The FBI considered discreetly substituting the parachutes for non-functional ones or tampering with the ransom, but they quickly dismissed these ideas, fearing that any deception could provoke a catastrophic reaction from Cooper. They were dealing with an unknown adversary, and any misstep could end in disaster. Finally, at 5:39 p.m., Flight 305 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The runway was illuminated by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, and law enforcement agents stood by, weapons at the ready. But Cooper remained calm and collected. He made no sudden movements, no threats. Instead, he ordered the plane's interior lights dimmed and instructed the crew to close all window shades, preventing any sharpshooter from getting a clear view inside. One by one, the passengers were released, still unaware of the gravity of what had transpired. For them, the ordeal was over, but for Cooper, the real escape was just beginning. He accepted the ransom money and parachutes without a word, methodically checking each of them to ensure that it was exactly what he requested. Then, with the cabin nearly empty, he issued his final instructions to the crew. They were to take off again and head south toward Mexico City, flying low and slow. Flight 305 lifted off once more, heading into the unknown. The crew, now confined to the cockpit under Cooper's orders, had no idea what he planned to do next. As the plane climbed to 10,000 feet, something extraordinary was about to happen. An act so daring, so audacious, that it would forever change the way we think about airline hijacking. Somewhere over the dark forest of Washington State, D.B. Cooper would take his leap into history, and, quite possibly, into oblivion. It was just after 7:40 p.m. when Flight 305 left Seattle, carrying a crew of 5 and a single, enigmatic passenger, D.B. Cooper. The Boeing 727 soared through the turbulent night, its engines humming steadily as it headed south toward Mexico. Cooper had meticulously planned every detail. He instructed the crew to maintain an altitude of 10,000 feet, a slow speed of just 200 miles an hour, and to keep the cabin depressurized, conditions that would facilitate his daring escape. In the cockpit, the pilots remained tense, following his orders to the letters, unsure of what would come next. Alone in the cabin, Cooper seemed eerily composed. He took off his black clip-on tie, later discovered by investigators with traces of DNA that would prove no conclusive leads, and began preparing for his leap into the unknown. He tied the ransom money carefully, packed into the bank bag around his waist, and secured one of the parachutes to his back. In a final act of preparation, he secured a secondary reserve chute to his chest. To the crew, confined in the cockpit, it was a tense waiting game. They could hear him moving around, but had no idea what he was planning. At approximately 8 p.m., Cooper made his move. He lowered the rear stairway of the plane that allowed access to the outside, even in mid-flight. As the stairwell descended, the wind roared into the cabin, creating a deafening noise and violent turbulence. The crew felt the sudden change in pressure and pitch, signaling that something extraordinary was happening. Cooper, standing at the edge of the stairwell, faced the howling wind and the impenetrable darkness below. He was about to attempt something no one had ever dared before. Just imagine the scene. Thousands of feet above the dense forest of Washington, in the middle of a raging storm, with freezing winds lashing at him, D.B. Cooper was preparing to jump. Below him lay miles of rugged terrain, unforgiving mountains, and uncharted wilderness. It was a leap fraught with danger, one that would test even the most skilled skydiver. Was Cooper truly prepared for this moment? Or was he driven by desperation, gambling everything on a single, reckless act of defiance? With the final step, Cooper jumped. Clad in his dark business suit and loafers, he leaped into the freezing, rain-soaked sky, wind tearing at his parachute as he fell. For a brief moment, he was suspended in the air, a lone figure against the stormy backdrop. And then, he was gone, swallowed by the night, vanishing into the vast, unforgiving wilderness below. The crew, locked in the cockpit, could only guess what had happened, aware that the heavy shift in the plane's balance as the rear stairway bounced back up, indicating that Cooper had made his fateful leap. Based on the plane's location at the time of the jump, the FBI determined that Cooper likely landed somewhere in the rugged wilderness of southwestern Washington, a vast area stretching from the Lewis River to the east and the Columbia River to the west. It was a region characterized by dense forest, steep mountains, and remote, inaccessible terrain. Search teams, armed with only a rough estimate of the landing zone, faced a daunting task. The odds of finding a single man in such a vast, uncharted wilderness were slim at best. The early morning hours of November 25, 1971, marked the beginning of one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. D.B. Cooper had vanished into the night, leaving the FBI and local law enforcement scrambling to locate the elusive hijacker and recover the $200,000 in ransom money. Despite the sheer scale of the operation, the challenges of tracking down a single man in this vast and unforgiving terrain were immense. With no clear evidence of where or even if Cooper had landed, authorities faced an unprecedented search effort that would span weeks, months, and eventually decades. The first step in the investigation was to establish a search area, a task easier said than done. The plane's crew estimated that Cooper had jumped somewhere near the Lewis River in the southern part of Washington state, but the exact location was shrouded in uncertainty. The Boeing 727's flight path had fluctuated due to turbulence, and the pilots couldn't pinpoint the precise moment the rear stairwell had been deployed. As a result, the initial search zone covered over 28 square miles of dense forest, rugged mountains, and icy rivers, an area teeming with potential hiding places and hazards. From the air and on the ground, search teams combed through the wilderness, looking for any sign of Cooper or his parachute. Helicopters flew low, their searchlights sweeping across the terrain, while agents and volunteers on foot braved the harsh conditions, battling through thick underbrush and frigid temperatures. The area was remote and difficult to access, with many parts of the forest still untouched by human activity. Despite their best efforts, the search yielded no clues. The wilderness was silent, offering no hints to Cooper's fate. Specially trained search dogs were brought in to help, their handlers hoping they might catch Cooper's scent or locate discarded items. But even the dogs seemed baffled by the rugged, ever-changing landscape. Weeks passed, and morale among the search teams began to wane. The deeper they ventured into the wilderness, the clearer it became. If Cooper had landed here, he had either evaded capture with extraordinary skill, or he hadn't survived the jump at all. Every few days, search teams would find potential clues: fragments of fabric, discarded rope, and even pieces of torn paper. Each discovery was scrutinized, but none could be conclusively linked to the hijacker. Despite the meticulous efforts of the FBI and hundreds of volunteers, not a single piece of evidence definitively belonging to Cooper was ever recovered. It was as if he had simply vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind no trace of his daring escape. As the winter set in, the search was officially suspended, but the investigation continued in other ways. Agents scoured local hospitals, looking for anyone who might have sustained injuries consistent with a high-altitude jump. They visited Army surplus stores, questioning owners about recent purchases of parachuting equipment. But these leads, like so many others, led nowhere. The FBI also turned to people who lived in the area, asking locals to report any strange behavior or unfamiliar faces. Yet, no credible sightings of Cooper were ever reported. The biggest break in the case wouldn't come until 1980, nearly 9 years after the hijacking, when a family on a picnic stumbled upon 3 bundles of decayed cash along the banks of the Columbia River. The bills, totaling $5,800, were confirmed to be part of the ransom money, identified by their serial numbers. The discovery reignited the investigation, raising new questions about Cooper's fate. Had he lost the money during the jump? Had he buried it himself? Or had it washed ashore from somewhere else? The exact circumstances remain a mystery, adding yet another layer of intrigue to the already perplexing case. Despite renewed efforts to search the area around the Columbia River, no further evidence was found. The money, deteriorated and partially buried in the sand, was the last tangible link to D.B. Cooper. Theories abound. Had he drowned in the river after his jump? Or had he staged the scene to throw investigators off his trail? With no physical evidence to go on, the investigation shifted focus to identifying the man behind the alias Dan Cooper. The FBI compiled a list of over 800 suspects, everyone from paratroopers and former military personnel to airline employees and known criminals. But each one was ruled out, either by alibi, lack of evidence, or failure to match eyewitness descriptions. Composite sketches based on the memories of the flight crew and passengers were circulated nationwide. From the moment D.B. Cooper leapt from that plane and vanished into the stormy night, a single question has haunted investigators amateur sleuths and the American public. Who was he? For decades, the search for Cooper's true identity has captivated the imagination of countless people, each offering their own theories, suspects, and explanations. Was he a disgruntled airline employee, a military-trained parachutist, or perhaps just a clever criminal who knew exactly how to cover his tracks? The FBI pursued over 1,000 leads, but none conclusively identified the enigmatic hijacker. To this day, his true identity remains one of the greatest mysteries in American history. Cooper's appearance is well known, thanks to the composite sketches created by eyewitness descriptions. Flight attendants Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow, who interacted with him directly, described him as a white male in his mid-40s, standing about 5'10" to 6 foot tall, with dark hair and wearing a black suit and tie. He was soft-spoken, polite, and seemed to be in control at all times. But beyond these basic details, little else about him was clear. He left behind no identification, and the name Dan Cooper, later misreported as D.B. Cooper, turned out to be an alias, one that offered no clues to his real identity. The FBI's search for Cooper's true identity began with painstaking review of individuals who matched the hijacker's description. Over 800 suspects were investigated in the first 5 years alone, ranging from ex-military personnel and skilled skydivers to known criminals and those with aviation experience. Despite these extensive efforts, each suspect was eventually ruled out, either through solid alibis or lack of physical evidence, or failure to match the eyewitness descriptions. The case file grew thicker, but the man at the center of the investigation remained a shadow. One of the most compelling suspects was Richard Floyd McCoy, a former Green Beret and Vietnam War veteran. In April 1972, just 5 months after Cooper's hijacking, McCoy executed a nearly identical crime. He hijacked a United Airlines flight, demanded a ransom of $500,000, and parachuted out of the plane over Utah. McCoy was quickly captured and the money recovered, but many believed he might also be Cooper. After all, his methods were strikingly similar, and he had both the military training and the daring to pull off such a stunt. However, McCoy was ruled out because he did not match the physical descriptions provided by Flight 305's crew, and he was in Las Vegas at the day of Cooper hijacking. Another intriguing suspect was Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper and flight attendant for Northwest Orient Airlines, the very airline Cooper hijacked. Christensen's knowledge of the aircraft and flight procedures, combined with his striking resemblance to the composite sketches, made him a strong candidate. When he died in 1994, his family discovered a secret stash of cash and a note that hinted that he might have been involved in the hijacking. But the FBI dismissed Christensen as a suspect, citing a lack of direct evidence connecting him to the crime and the fact that he was shorter and lighter than Cooper was reported to be. Then there's the case of Robert Rackstraw, a Vietnam veteran and explosive expert with a history of run-ins with law. Rackstraw's military background, including training in parachuting and survival skills, made him a tantalizing suspect. He was even known to have hinted at being Cooper during interviews, though he always stopped short of a full confession. Some believe his cryptic comments and his knowledge of aviation suggest he could be the hijacker. Yet, once again, the FBI ruled him out, citing insufficient evidence and his inability to definitively link himself to the hijacking. Rackstraw passed away in 2019, taking his secrets with him. Over the years, dozens of other names have been suggested, some more plausible than others. Men like Dwayne Weber, who reportedly confessed to his wife on his deathbed that he was D.B. Cooper, or John List, a fugitive who bore a resemblance to Cooper and disappeared around the same time. Each new suspect brought a fresh wave of speculation and excitement, but none proved the breakthrough that would close the case for good. For each theory that surfaced, there was always a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. Even as the years turned into decades, the hunt for D.B. Cooper's true identity never fully ceased. With each anniversary of the hijacking, fresh interest in the case would emerge, spurred on by new theories, confessions, and occasional discoveries. Armchair detectives, independent researchers, and even former FBI agents continued to pore over the evidence, hoping to find that elusive clue that would break the case. Cooper's legend grew, transforming him from a criminal into a folk hero, a symbol of audacity and mystery. In recent years, advancements in forensic science have added new layers to the investigation. The clip-on tie Cooper left behind on the plane was found to contain microscopic particles of pure titanium, a rare material in the 1970s, used primarily for aerospace engineering. This led to speculation that Cooper might have been connected to the aviation industry or in a related field. Yet, despite analyzing over 100 potential suspects' DNA, none have matched the partial sample obtained from the tie, leaving the case as frustratingly open-ended as ever. So, who was D.B. Cooper? A brilliant criminal mastermind who planned every detail of his escape, or a desperate man who took a wild leap into the unknown? Was he someone who blended back into society, living out his days in quiet anonymity? Or did he meet a tragic end in the wilderness? After all these years, the identity of D.B. Cooper remains a riddle, a puzzle with too many pieces missing, and unless new evidence comes to light, it may be a mystery that remains unsolved forever. Whoever he was, D.B. Cooper has left an indelible mark on the collective psyche, a reminder that even in an age of technology and surveillance, some mysteries can endure, and some legends never die. What do you think? Was Cooper an aviation insider, a military veteran, or perhaps someone else entirely? Share your theories and thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep the search for the truth alive. Despite the FBI's exhaustive investigation and decades of relentless pursuit by amateur sleuths, the truth remains elusive. How could a man with nothing more than a business suit and a pair of loafers, a couple parachutes, and $200,000 in cash simply vanish without a trace? Did Cooper pull off the perfect crime, or did he succumb to the unforgiving wilderness? The theories about his fate range from the plausible to the impossible, each offering a different explanation as to what might have happened on that fateful night. One of the most debated questions is whether D.B. Cooper even survived the jump. Some experts argue that his parachuting experience, combined with his calm demeanor and meticulous planning, suggest he was well prepared. But others point out the several risks he faced: the stormy weather, the low visibility, and the frigid temperatures. Cooper's choice of equipment has also sparked debate. He requested 2 main and 2 reserve parachutes, cleverly assuming that authorities would provide functional equipment rather than risk harming a hostage. However, he was mistakenly given a non-functional reserve chute that was only meant to be used during ground training. Cooper, ended up using this non-functional reserve as well as a non-steerable military-style main parachute instead of the steerable civilian model that he was also provided with, which most experts agree was an ill-suited choice for navigating the dense forest and jagged terrain in the area. So, was this a fatal error or a calculated risk? If Cooper did survive the perilous jump, the next challenge would have been the harsh environment he found himself in. The area where he is believed to have landed is rugged, with steep mountains, dense forests, and freezing rivers. Surviving the initial descent was just the first obstacle. Evading search teams and making his way out of the wilderness without being spotted would have been a monumental task. So, did Cooper manage to slip away under the cover of night, or did the wilderness claim him as one of its own? The lack of any definitive evidence, no body, no parachute, no personal items, leaves room for endless speculation. As mentioned earlier, one of the most intriguing clues came nearly 9 years after the hijacking, when a young boy named Brian Ingram discovered 3 bundles of ransom money along the banks of the Columbia River near Tina Bar. The bills were waterlogged and partially disintegrated, yet their serial numbers matched those given to Cooper. This discovery seemed to confirm that at least part of Cooper's loot had made it to the ground. But it also raised new questions. How did the money end up there? Some suggest it was accidentally dropped during the jump and was later carried downstream by the river's currents. Others believe Cooper may have intentionally buried the money to mislead investigators. The exact path of the cash remains a mystery. Geologists and hydrologists have analyzed the site extensively, trying to determine how the money arrived at Tina Bar. One theory suggests that the bills were carried by the Lewis River, which flows into the Columbia, and were later deposited at Tina Bar by a dredging operation in the early 1970s. This theory fits with the location and condition of the money, but still doesn't explain how the cash traveled for 20 miles from the suspected jump zone to its final resting place. Was Cooper nearby when the money was lost, or was it a random series of events that scattered the evidence, leaving us with more questions than answers? Then there's the theory that D.B. Cooper survived the jump, made his way to safety, and simply disappeared into society. Proponents of this idea argue that Cooper was too composed, too methodical, to leave anything to chance. Some believe he had an accomplice waiting for him on the ground, ready to whisk him away. Others speculate that he might have used false identities, blending seamlessly back into civilian life. Could Cooper have been living among us all these years, watching as his legend grew, knowing he had gotten away with the perfect crime? Over the years, several letters were sent to newspapers and authorities, purportedly from Cooper himself. These letters, each claiming to be from the elusive hijacker, varied in tone and detail. Some taunted law enforcement, while others hinted at new clues or boasted of his clever escape. But none of these letters could be verified, and most were dismissed as hoaxes. Still, they added another layer of intrigue to an already complex mystery. If Cooper did survive, would he really risk exposing himself just to play mind games with the FBI? With so little evidence to go on, the theories about D.B. Cooper's identity and fate range from the plausible to the downright bizarre. Was he a disgruntled airline employee exacting revenge against an industry? A thrill-seeking adventurer who saw the hijacking as the ultimate challenge? Or perhaps he was just an ordinary man, driven by desperation or a need to prove himself, who happened to pull off the heist of the century. Each theory has its own merits and flaws, but none can fully explain every aspect of the case. In July 2016, after 45 years of investigation and thousands of leads, the FBI announced that it was officially closing the active case on D.B. Cooper. The decision came after extensive efforts to identify the hijacker, using the latest forensic methods and reanalyzing old evidence. With no new breakthroughs and resources stretched thin, the Bureau decided to redirect its focus to more pressing cases. But for many, the closure felt premature. After all, the FBI's own files acknowledged that the identity of D.B. Cooper remained unknown and that the case was still unsolved. While the FBI may have closed the book on the official investigation, the legend of D.B. Cooper is far from over. His story has become a part of American folklore, a tale of audacity and mystery that continues to inspire those who refuse to let the case fade into obscurity. New theories and suspects emerge every year, driven by independent investigators and an ever-growing community of enthusiasts, determined to solve the puzzle that has stumped generations of detectives. Over 50 years ago, on a cold, stormy night in November, a man boarded a plane, carried out a heist unlike any other, and vanished into the darkness. That man, known to history as D.B. Cooper, left behind no identity, no body, and almost no trace. Only questions, and a legend that has grown with each passing year. His daring leap into the unknown has cemented his place in American folklore, transforming a simple hijacking into one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. But what is it about this story that continues to captivate us long after the trail has gone cold? In the decade since his disappearance, D.B. Cooper has become more than just a name. He's a symbol, an enigma, a figure who exists at the intersection of reality and myth. His story has been told and retold in countless books, documentaries, and films, each one adding another layer to the mystique. Theories abound, suspects are scrutinized, and yet the ultimate truth remains tantalizingly out of reach. Part of Cooper's allure is his defiance of the system. He took on the establishment and, for all we know, got away with it. In a world where so few mysteries remain, Cooper's story endures as a reminder that not everything can be explained. So, perhaps in the end, the real story isn't about D.B. Cooper at all. It's about us, about our endless curiosity and our need to solve the unsolvable. Cooper's story is a mirror, reflecting our fascination with the unknown and the unquenchable desire to uncover the truth, no matter how elusive it may be. So what do you think happened to D.B. Cooper? Did he outsmart the FBI and live out his days in peace? Or did the wilderness claim him, leaving behind only whispers of his fate? Let us know your theories in the comments below, because as long as the mystery remains, the story of D.B. Cooper is far from over. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the mystery of D.B. Cooper. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more explorations of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. This is Jason, signing off from Mysterious Wilderness. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.